On today's episode of Locked On Wild, the Wild let one slip against the Detroit Red Wings last night. What the heck happened?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will hear from John Hynes after a 3-2 loss to the Detroit Red Wings last night, which was a rare loss because the Minnesota Wild scored first and still somehow we're not able to pull off the win. So we'll hear about what John Hynes thought of the game. We'll also do a little investigating as to why the Wild weren't able to secure the win in last night's game. We're also going to talk to Jonny Lazarus of the Daily FaceOff about the Four Nations FaceOff, some of the things that went well and some of the things that can be improved upon for the Olympics and also for World Cup of Hockey and otherwise coming up. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, and I sound better? No, not better. We're working through it, though, so apologies again, and I'll try to make this as upbeat as possible so that it's actually enjoyable to listen to with my current state of voice. But the Wild lost last night by a score of 3-2 to the Detroit Red Wings. And it was an odd loss because the Wild scored 2 goals in the first period. And when the Wild score first, they are near unbeatable on the road. At home, it is a little bit of a different story. Now, obviously, still have an impressive record when they do score first at home, but just world beaters on the road in those instances. The Minnesota Wild win scoring first, 24-9-2 overall. At home, they're just 9-7-1. They are 15-2-1 on the road. When they lead after one period at home, they are 4-2-1. On the road, they're 14-1. So I struggle with how this continues to happen and why it's just so hard to win consistently at home. A building that you should handily, you should win your games handily. And the Wild now are 13-1 at home. Not great, but to spare me as much voice as possible, why don't we hear from John Hynes from last night's post-game presser to see what his thoughts were on the win, and then we'll react to what he said to get a little better idea as to how the Wild let that one slip.
You guys got off to a great start, and truthfully, watching as the second period kind of unfolded, you weren't giving up a ton of chances. How do you kind of digest this one?
I think it's a disappointing loss in the sense that I thought we played a really solid game. I thought we carried play. I think you look at most categories, we were there: offensive zone time, chances for, grade A's. They found a way to get a couple more goals than we did. But I think the style of game that we played, the structure we played with, the offensive attack that we had, we did lots of good things tonight. But sometimes that's how it goes.
Is that how you're going to have to, the template of how you're going to have to play with, especially with Ek and Kaprizov out for a while?
It's the same template if we have Ek and Kaprizov the same way. It doesn't change the identity of how the team wants to play. Now, when you don't have those two guys in the lineup, there's different skill sets there. But I think if you look at tonight's game, I mean, there's not much to, that we didn't do well. We did lots of things well. We just didn't find a way to win the game.
Coming back, John, especially amid the injuries, this is an opportunity for him to kind of provide that maybe jolt from lower in the lineup and just give steady minutes going to the net tonight. on his goal?
Yeah, going to the net, and that's what we're going to need from him. He's been out, quite a bit this year, so hopefully he can stay healthy and get his game going the way that we need it. North, south, physical, go to the net front, check really hard. So it was nice to have him back, but I'd like to see him get in, stay in, and get his game going and contribute to the team.
Your best chance to make it a 3-goal lead was on that power play. Hinestroza right on the doorstep there. Just what have you seen from him going to the net? He really seems to be a net front player.
Yeah, he goes to the the hard areas of the ice. I think he's a competitive kid, all over the ice. But when he gets into the offensive zone, or particularly on the power play, he's got a knack to and a willingness to be able to get in there, and he gets good looks.
Offensively, Lapa was saying that he felt like you guys did stray. The way your first 2 goals were scored were net front goals, and that sort of strayed away from that. I mean, did you feel like you were having a tougher time getting to the interior? Or
No, I didn't see that. I thought that we had. You could dissect it and say maybe we could have triggered the puck a little bit more, but I think it was 6 to 8 chances in the slot in that area of the ice. I thought we were out on the net front. We screened the goalie. We did a lot of good things. Unfortunately, tonight sometimes that happens. You play a pretty strong game, and you don't find a way to win it.
Anything else?
Thanks.
All right, thanks.
And, you listen to what John Hynes had to say. It is interesting because it comes down to, I think, the second and third goals that Filip Gustavsson gave up last night to Detroit. Now, they both came from Simon Edvinsson, who is more of a defensive defenseman. I mean, he's got now 7 goals on the season, but definitely more of a defensive guy than an offensive guy. And honestly, both of the shots came from the top of the zone. On one of them, there was nobody around the net to shade Filip Gustavsson to hide his viewpoint. He just missed it. And on the other, there was a little bit of traffic out in front. The puck goes out to the top. You're not putting a ton of focus on a guy like that at the top of the zone, because those are the shots that your goalie should make saves on. The Red Wings had 29 unblocked shot attempts last night. 23 of them were low danger, 5 were medium danger, and 1 was high danger. The Red Wings scored 1 medium danger and 2 low danger goals last night. And the expected goals against was 1.4. So again, I say, when we're talking about expected goals against, the higher the number, the more struggles the defense had. If you're under 2, that means that your defense did a really good job of limiting the chances the opposing team had. And 16 shots on goal, I think, was the total amount for the Red Wings in last night's game. If the Wild could find a way, if Filip Gustavsson could find a way to save one of those 2 goals, because honestly, the one, the goal by Tarasenko, honestly, that one didn't bother me a ton. That's just a shooter's shot, and he was able to, from a very tough angle, he was able to slide one in top shelf past Filip Gustavsson. That goal doesn't really bother me a ton. The second and the third absolutely do, because you've got time to react. You just kind of get caught in between. And with how Cam Talbot played, even after his start, that was the difference in the game last night. So I tend to agree with John Hynes. Now, maybe you'd need to try to find a way to get a third goal, and that's certainly understandable. But the way that the team played, especially defensively, they did a really good job of limiting what Detroit had for chances. And it was just a situation where Filip Gustavsson could not make the saves that he needed to. And that's why they lost last night. So always enjoy hearing John Hynes' thoughts after the game. And we'll be, of course, incorporating this more into our episodes as the season draws to a close. When we come back, we're going to talk to Johnny Lazarus of the Daily FaceOff, get his thoughts on the Four Nations FaceOff, what worked and what didn't. And we'll also get his thoughts on the Eastern Conference, the wild card spot, which it just seems like nobody wants. We'll talk about all that as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. You just realized that your business needed to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored job posts put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. Indeed was super influential and critical to my ability to find a new job after I was let go right before the summer, because they like tying strings together. They find a way to take your qualifications and match them up with the things that businesses that are posting positions are looking for. It worked out great, and it led to me getting what I thought were a lot of quality opportunities that I could have gone for. Ended up finding one, and that's as they say, the rest is history. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We'll see how things go tomorrow as far as postcast goes. If I'm even close to this state tomorrow, it's going to be a no. But we'll see if I can, just continue to remedy and kick this thing, because to say it's annoying is an understatement. We had a chance to talk to Johnny Lazarus earlier today to get his thoughts on the Four Nations FaceOff. So let's hear from Johnny first on the Four Nations, and then we'll break. Then we'll come back and we'll talk about the Eastern Conference a little bit to round out the show. And joining us today to discuss the Four Nations FaceOff, as well as a look at if anybody in the East even wants that second wildcard spot, Johnny Lazarus of the Daily FaceOff. And Johnny, it's good to have you back on. And glad to be able to recap what was a largely successful tournament for the NHL with the Four Nations FaceOff. Crazy ratings, intense games, and I know it was something that the NHL was just trying. But what were some of the things that stood out to you about the Four Nations FaceOff?
Well, the tournament itself, like just the energy around the games was unreal. I mean, that was my first time at the Bell Center, so getting to experience it in that magnitude, Sweden versus Canada was, I mean, like, I don't want to say I had chills because I'm not a Canadian, obviously, but it was the closest thing I think I've experienced to like a Game 7 Cup final for the USA-Canada game. The nerves, even though it was a round-robin game, there was just more to it. And again, like I've gotten so lost in my own thoughts trying to explain it, and I'm doing it again. And I'm like acknowledging that it's happening. But even when McDavid scored in the championship game, I wasn't like angry that the U.S. lost. I was just like sad that it was over. Like I could have watched so much more of that hockey just because it was so entertaining. And yeah, it was, I mean, the whole 2 weeks was just, it was awesome. It's so hard. It was awesome. Unlike anything I've experienced before. And I'm so happy that the NHL did it. I'm so happy it was successful. And, I'm so happy that there's eyes on hockey right now, because I think it's awesome.
Yeah. And that was the big thing, was just trying to get more fans to tune in and watch these games. And the ratings were just insane. The US Canada game had over 4 million viewers, which was the highest viewed non-Stanley Cup final game since 2019. And the championship game more than doubled that. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about bringing new eyes to the sport. And I think one of the things that I was a little confused about was just, it didn't seem like it was marketed enough, but clearly the NHL knew what it was doing, because it just blew all of the expectations.
You didn't hear Four Nations facing off enough?
I heard. I wanted to hear more of it. but I'm
I
some,
thought it was too much.
somebody that's in the business. Like I was just expecting, I was expecting a little more, I guess, for those that don't follow hockey on a daily basis. But again, like they just far away exceeded any of my expectations for what this thing was going to be.
Yeah, and I think Keith Yandel actually explained it the best on Spit and Chicklets too. Like, you have to credit the players and thank the players. Like, they bought into doing it, right? Like, these guys could have easily taken a vacation, and instead they put their bodies in the lines for 4 games and gave us something that's wildly entertaining. So that doesn't happen without the players really buying into the concept, because it could have been an all-star game. It could have, and I think a lot of us, I don't want to say expected it, but like anticipated it, even though those are kind of the same word. But you know what I mean? Like, it was all the players building up the rivalry, building up the hate, and obviously the political climate had something to do with it too. But I'm not a politics belong in hockey kind of guy, but like, you can't ignore it at times as well.
Yeah.
So I recognize that, but I really just thought the players did a great job at building up the hate and building up the rivalry and kind of playing into everything that was USA Canada. And honestly, like, credit to Finland and Sweden as well. Like, they showed up too. Sweden made a really good game with Canada. Obviously they beat the US. That Finland Sweden game was great also. It was a wildly entertaining couple weeks.
And obviously the next iteration of this will be the World Cup of Hockey when it's not an Olympic year. That was the whole point of this, was to try to get more into international competition. And it is interesting that this was just kind of a tryout for, especially for Team USA, like, who are going to be the players that are leading the Olympic roster. And it was impressive to me how much both Matthew and Brady Tkachuk became kind of the focal points of Team USA. And so you got to, you're looking towards the Olympics, they got to be like the backbone of this roster when you're building it, right?
Like, yes and no. I still think Team USA, like, what sets them apart is their blue line. And I think those are probably the biggest question marks, just as far as like who will be on their blue line next year. Obviously, no Quinn, no Charlie in the championship game. I thought Brock Faber was unbelievable. He's probably one of the guys that, there's more eyeballs on after the tournament. Like, people were aware of Slavin and knew he's a great defensive defenseman. And he got a lot of good press and publicity from the tournament, but there are probably a lot of people who didn't know enough about Brock Faber that now do. Obviously watching him in college a little bit, I didn't tune into every Minnesota game, but I got to see him in the Frozen Four and a little bit in the NCAA tournament. Like, I knew what his game was. And last year, Colby and I on our show actually said, like, he is right up there with Bedard for Rookie of the Year. Like, a rookie taking on 25 plus minutes playing defense is something that's not an easy task. And we were really pushing for that for a little bit, but for him to show up the way he did. And again, like, the first game, I thought there were a little bit of nerves. Obviously there would be, for a young guy taking on a tall task like that, but throughout the tournament, he just got better and better and better. And, I thought he was one of their best defensemen. And, a guy like that, I don't know if he's a focal point, but, Team USA needs a strong blue line to keep up and defend a team like Canada. Like, that is a primary focus. Obviously the Tkachuks as well up front. But I do think the blue line is the primary focus for Team USA, just because of who they're up against.
Yeah. You've got those iconic weapons, Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, who's been a fixture in international play for Canada forever. You got to be able to defend those guys. Thankfully, Team USA is always going to have Connor Hellebuck to be that fixture in net. So that certainly helps out. But, it's interesting to just kind of get those gears turning as to, like, what does this roster look like? There were so many people that, a guy like Tage Thompson, so many people were saying, well, he should have been on the roster because Team
Like
USA, they needed some scoring help, and he could have easily provided that. But there's always hindsight with these types of things. Yeah. And like, well, this player could have helped out, but I would imagine he'd be somebody that would get a strong look for the Olympic team.
Well, also with how hot he was going in, I personally thought Tage should have been on the team. And if you look at the guys like leading into the tournament who were on fire that didn't make the team, even Mark Scheifele for Canada, but Tage Thompson had 18 points in 15 games, from the flip of the calendar to the start of the tournament. Clayton Keller was up there as well. Keller had 22 points in 18 games, and then Jason Robertson, 23 points in 19 games. Like those three guys were the three notable names, I'd say, that were left off the USA roster that were playing well going into the tournament. So, obviously you can look at that and maybe add one of those guys late. I don't know how the roster construction would have worked at that point. Obviously we saw Thomas Harley, because of an injury, be able to make the team, and Chris Kreider was banged up going into the tournament. So like he was a big question mark. I mean, even when he made the team originally, I was like, I don't know if he should be there.
Yeah.
But with Tage, like the size is a lot too. Like he's a big physical forward, and he's not afraid to throw the body either. So that's why I thought he was something that was the most interesting, because if you're trying to build out a strong team up front, like how do you leave Tage Thompson off that list? He's one of the biggest, smoothest skating forwards at his size in the NHL, if not the number one. So I thought that was interesting too. And obviously his goal scoring, he's got 29 goals already this year. It seemed like a no-brainer, but I don't know. Also, like the way hockey works, sometimes the roster decisions are a little bit political. Like, guys that are in charge of the team are looking after their players. Like Chris Drury was a part of the, roster management as well. And I'm sure he, put in a word for Kreider and guys like Trocheck, who I thought Trocheck belonged there. Even though he didn't have like the best tournament, I don't think he was bad by any means. But yeah, like you can always point to the team that loses and ask questions. Like, had the U.S. found a way to score in overtime, we're probably not talking about it. But because they didn't,
right,
we're talking about it.
Yeah, and I think the only thing really that needs to be ironed out is just the roster construction, like you alluded to, because we had, it Canada when Cale Makar was unable to play, Thomas Harley came in, but he wasn't able to warm up. He had to just go in.
Yeah.
Obviously with Charlie McAvoy, that was another situation for Team USA. So that's really the only thing, but you would imagine that'll be ironed out before the Olympics or before the World Cup of Hockey, to say, we'll give you a couple extra players on your roster in the event that some of these players are injured. Because you've got Quinn Hughes, who is like trying to come in like Superman and say, I'll play, I'll help you guys out. And then they're like, no, you won't.
Yeah. Well, that was Vancouver. That was like all them. That was just like, we don't want you to go get hurt. We're in a playoff mix right now. Like we can't, and especially after seeing what Saturday's game was like, I'm sure we don't want you to go get killed, which makes sense. Like it's tough, right? Like, these things, like I say they're worth it. I'm sure the players say they're worth it. But if you're trying to win a Stanley Cup and you're in charge of a team, you put that first always, So it is difficult, but yeah, it's I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this adds to Olympic competition, World Cup of Hockey as well. But we got a couple of years before we have to deal with that.
Not really. Olympics is 340 something days, 330 something days away.
We've got slightly less than a year to figure it out.
Yeah.
Big thank you to Jonny Lazarus for joining us here today, and we'll finish the conversation with Jonny as we discuss the Eastern Conference, because that second wildcard spot is a bit of a fight. So we'll talk about that as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, we'll keep you posted as to if there is a postcast after tomorrow's game, but at this point, it's probably looking like no. There's just nothing. There's really nothing in the voice box right now, so we'll see, but we'll keep you posted. We did finish our conversation with Jonny Lazarus talking a little bit about the Eastern Conference and just looking at the wild card fight that is going on over there. So we'll finish with that. And coming up on the show tomorrow, we've got Jessie Pierce joining us. So Jessie will give her reaction to the Joel Eriksson Ek news. Look at what the team can even do about it the rest of the way. See if we can get a little more on Kaprizov. That's all coming up on tomorrow's show, but let's finish with Johnny here for today. Johnny, let's finish by just looking at the Eastern Conference, because that wild card race is insane. There are so many teams that are not technically out of it. Does anybody want that second wild card spot?
I mean, if it's anyone that wants it, it's probably Columbus, I would think, who's in it right now. I mean, they want to give their fans a reward, right, for everything they've been through this past year and what they've been through the past few years. But I do think Columbus is certainly playing like a team that wants it, obviously, just because of what their roster is on paper. It's more difficult. They're not the skilled team in the league. I sure hope the Rangers go after it and get it. Detroit's played well after the break too. Obviously, you know that, watching a couple of games against Detroit, even though they let that lead slip in that first game. But I don't know. Like, the question for me too is, do any teams drop? Like, I don't think Tampa drops. I don't know if Florida drops without Matthew Tkachuk. Like, obviously it's a big loss, but they're still so sound that I don't see them like really slipping. But yeah, I mean, I really do think it's the Rangers or Columbus. I don't see Boston being consistent. I mean, they looked terrible last night. I don't see Montreal. I mean, maybe there's some magic there. They had a good win last night against Carolina, but I don't know if it's sustainable. And then the other teams below that, it's not even a concern.
Yeah. It's at this point, they're not
in Columbus.
Yeah. At this point, those other teams are not mathematically eliminated, but
they're just not good enough.
Yeah. They're not appealing in those spots.
Montreal getting that spot, I'd be fine with too. Like, it'd be cool to see playoff hockey back in Montreal.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm just hoping that a few of these teams fall out of it, so the Wild can actually go get somebody to help their injury situation. But all these teams, like, they're within 5 or 6 points, so the GMs are like, well, maybe we're not out of it yet, so we're gonna just hold on to everything. It's gonna be a big couple of weeks here before the trade deadline.
Is there a timeline for Kaprizov?
Well, not officially, because the initial was 4 to 6, and I think it seems more like it's going to be 6. But you look at, like, I just did this for Joel Eriksson. His timeline is, I think, more like 6 to 8. 6 weeks leaves you 4 games left in the regular season.
Yeah.
So we're getting to crunch time here at the end, which leads me to believe that I think the Wild are going to actually go do something and just hope that those guys can come back for the postseason.
Mm-hmm. May as well at that point, right?
Vegas has done it. Tampa Bay's done it. Yeah. Minnesota might as well try it too.
Yeah. I'm all for that.
I just want to see. I just want to see something done. See some moves made. But
when's the last time Minnesota's really done that?
Well, they've made minor moves the last couple of seasons, but never really like a big go all in type thing. The last time they tried that, it didn't work out that well. It was Martin Hansel, I think, but can you even call that an all in move?
I don't think so.
No,
unless at the time he was one of the bigger names, like maybe, because I think that's all dependent too, right? Like,
yeah,
depends who's out there.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on who's available and what your needs are. It's been such a weird season for the Wild. One of the best teams in the league on the road, can't win at home. I don't know. I can't figure it out.
But I need Zuccarello to start scoring.
So do we.
Yeah, I have him to score 20 goals in a parlay. He's like the one guy that I'm concerned about right now that's stopping me from winning it.
Well, hopefully he'll pick it up so that you're happy and so that the Wild are happy too, because they need him. They need him to start adding some goals, because no Kaprizov, no Ek. Somebody's got to score the goals. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. But Johnny, thanks for the time here today. Yeah. I know you've got a hard out here, so we'll let you get going. But we'll keep in touch, and we'll see how things go with the Eastern Conference down the stretch. And we'll have to do this again as we get closer to playoff time.
You always know I'm happy to hop on whenever, Seth, so I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Big thank you to Johnny Lazarus for joining us here on today's show. We've got Jesse Pierce lined up for tomorrow. We'll talk to Kevin Gorg on Friday. So we've got guests for you here the rest of the week. And that is going to do it for today's episode. Pray for my voice to come back, because this is it's no fun. But we will continue to do episodes here with whatever I have available. And make sure to subscribe if you have not already, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.